Yeah, good evening, everybody. This is Rajesh Jampala, President National HRD Network Vijayawada chapter. I welcome all the participants to the webinar on National Education Policy, its implications on HR, organized by National HRD Network Vijayawada chapter, ably supported by PV Siddhartha College of Arts and Science. National Education Policy is a landmark event that has happened. In the last month, the government has released the National Education Policy, which is considered to be the watershed in terms of mitigating the challenges the Indian education system is facing. Naturally, this particular topic evinced a keen interest among a lot of academicians. So that is amplified through the number of registrations. We got more than 890 registrations. Most of them are faculty members spanning across the globe. Actually, I should say most of the registrations come from across the India. Almost 25 states we got the registrations. And I'm very happy to share with you that we got a quite number of registrations from foreign countries also, including US, UK, Philippines, Ethiopia, and Morocco. As you're all aware, this particular national education policy is considered to be the stepping stone for making India, that is Bharat, the Vishwaguru once again. The overarching vision of national education policy is to make India the global knowledge superpower. And it will also instill the feeling of pride in being Indian. That means the youngsters should reinforce the fundamental duties, the constitution, values, and bonding with the country are also aimed at this particular policy. We have with us a very thorough professional as a chief resource person. And in fact, we thought that this particular topic, which is very contemporary and emerging in its application, which will help the youngsters as well as the existing corporate professionals, how to tune themselves with the changing needs. For example, in India, the skill set or the knowledge, the attitudes of the youngsters makes a lot. So at the same time, this new education policy is aiming to give a lot of flexibility and access to the students or the youngsters which were not brought into the mainstream. So quality, access, as well as flexibility are the three important pillars of this particular national education policy. This policy is trying to break the silos. That means an art students can study the liberal music or liberal arts, or the science and technology student can opt for economics. So in that context, the flexibility is given, multiple entry, multiple exit options were given, and student achievements are recognized, and a credit bank is created so that he can go back out of the institution and he can come back at his own will. In this context, it will help a lot of what I can say individualistic learning and a customized approach for learning mechanisms. So this is a topic which was suggested by none other than our regional South Region President, Sudesh Venkatesh, an HRDN, and is a staunch supporter of educational field. And I would like to briefly introduce him. Sudesh is a Chief People's Officer of Azim Premji Foundation and is on the Board of Management of Azim Premji University. The foundation works to improve the quality of education of the underprivileged children in India. Prior to joining the foundation, Sudesh was Head of Human Resources for TESCO, India, and later Shared Services Lead for TESCO's UK People Program. Sudesh started his career with Asian Paints, was the president of National HRD Network, NHRD, and Bangalore chapter for the years 2013 to 15, and served on its national board from 2013 to 2017. He is currently the regional president south of NHRD network. Sudesh holds a postgraduate degree in management from the Indian Institute of Management, Kolkata. So we are very privileged to have Sudesh sir, and we are very much eager to look towards you for your wonderful message. Now I am handing over the proceedings to our Chief Resource Person, Mr. Sudesh.
Right. Thanks, Professor Rajesh. Am I audible?
Please, sir. You can go ahead. Yes.
All right. Thank you. First of all, a big thank you to the Vijayawada chapter for organizing this and inviting me to share my thoughts. I have a presentation which I will walk the participants through. Perhaps that will take about 30 to 35 minutes. And we can then open it up for questions. And you could, Professor Rajesh, moderate the questions and feed them, and I will respond to the best I can. Yeah.
Perfectly, sir.
So
Sir, you can
let me
share your screen, sir.
Yeah. Let me try this. Okay. Is a screen visible to you?
The attendees, it will be a larger screen will be displayed.
Can you guys see a screen?
Yeah, we are seeing your screen, sir. Actually, for attendees, the larger screen will be displayed. You put it in the presentation mode.
Okay. Yeah. No, this is just, I just wanted to introduce by starting off with the way the document itself looks. It's a 66-page document based on the longer 400 odd pages report of Dr. Kasturi Rangan's committee. And I would encourage all of you who are on this seminar to read this at your leisure. It's a wonderful document released by the government of India, right? Now, let me now bring up the presentation itself, and you can confirm if you can see this.
Yes, sir. It is visible, sir. Perfectly all right.
All right. Thank you. So today's discussion is on the new education policy and more specifically on the implications for HR. What we will do today is, I will try and give you an overview of the policy itself. Many of you may already be aware there has been a lot in the press, but nevertheless, a recap might be helpful. So I will cover it in two sections, the school education section and the higher education section. And after this overview of the policy, we can discuss a bit about the future of jobs. We are all in some way connected with the HR profession. And we should be starting to think of what will be the future of jobs, what kind of capabilities are required in this post-COVID world, and what does all this mean? So how does the new education policy and its vision tie up to the requirements of industry and organizations in the next 15, 20, 30 years, right? So that's the flow of the session, and this is what I will try and cover in about 30 to 35 minutes. We can then open it up for questions. The National Education Policy 2020 was approved by the Union Cabinet on 29th July. So it's exactly a month since the Cabinet approved this. And this has come after 3 decades. Many of you know that there have been previous policies on education, the Kothari Commission report being one of them. And the last was the 1986 policy. So after 3 decades, the government has now been able to come up with the new policy. What we are also seeing is a very strong commitment by the existing political leadership to reform the landscape of education. And in fact, one of the first things that was done when this government got their second term mandate is to put the policy out for public feedback, right? And since then, they have moved very fast, and the cabinet approved it. Now, education is a concurrent subject, and the implementation of the policy will, of course, depend on how the states go ahead with it. We are seeing that there is an eagerness in many states, example, Karnataka, Orissa, and they have even started to form action plans, and they have formed task groups which are setting up these action plans, and there seems to be a sense of urgency to implement it. Like Professor Rajesh Jampala said, the focus of the policy, like in fact, in some sense, what it was in the previous policies as well, is on equitability, inclusivity, and accessibility in Indian education system, which means that people who are socioeconomically disadvantaged should get good access to good education. The policy makes many far-reaching recommendations, and I believe that the fundamental principles are right. For example, it promotes multilingualism. It promotes a light but tight regulatory framework, and I'm using their terminology here, right? And like all of us know, this is a policy, and the policy needs to be converted to a plan, and the plan will subsequently need to be implemented. So, policy to plan to implementation, there are several stages, and the success of this will lie in how well are we able to implement it. I'm moving on. Let me cover in a few slides what are the key changes in school education. As many of you know, the Right to Education Act promised compulsory and free education to children from the ages 5 to 14, right? Now, what this policy is recommending is that education becomes free from the age of 3 till the age of 18. Of course, there are some changes in law, in the Right to Education Act itself, that need to be brought about for this to take effect. So some of the recommendations of the policy as we go forward, you will see, are dependent on legal approvals. Legal in the sense they will need the acts to be amended. And of course, many of them will need a lot of money. A big thrust of the policy is on early childhood education. And many of you know that the best learning of a child happens in that period when they are in that very early childhood, as they call it. And our Anganwadi system has largely focused on the nutrition aspects of childhood. This policy is recommending a greater emphasis on the education and learning aspects in the early years of the child. Second, school complexes. Now, what we have seen is across the country, a lot of schools have mushroomed because of the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan and several other initiatives. Access issue has been by and large served. In fact, it is said that there is a primary school today in a 2-kilometer radius of any habitation in the country, right? So the access issue has been solved. But the problem with this has been that there are many schools which are having just less than 10 children. There are teachers but no children. The school complexes are not adequately resourced. You can't have a library, you can't have a lab, you can't have a playground when you have such fragmentation. So another big recommendation of the policy is to form aggregations where there are school complexes where Anganwadis, schools offering lower grades, and the second grade school, all in a radius of a few kilometers, come together to be defined as a school complex. Third is there is a enormous focus on foundational numeracy and literacy. Many of you have followed the ASER reports in the country, which have talked about children not being able to do two-digit subtractions, children not being fifth standard children not being able to read second standard text. These kinds of issues have been there, right? And if one goes back, this talks to the point that the basic numeracy and literacy, what is called early language and math, needs to get high priority. Moving on, this school structuring itself, which on the left side you see, which is the current system, which has, the 10+2 system, as it's called. The 10 years of school education followed by 2 years of pre-college, pre-university, whatever, in different parts of the country it is called by different names. So the 10+2 system is what we have currently. That is now being changed to what is a 5+3+3+4. The first 5 years, and like I said, now the Anganwadis are being integrated into the education, and therefore the first 3 years are in Anganwadi, the 2 years are in what is called early primaries, which both together, put together, the 3 years of Anganwadi plus early primary becomes the foundational. Then there are 3 years from class 3 to 5, which is called the preparatory. And then there is another 3 years, which is class 6 to 8, which is called middle. And then there are 4 years, which are for secondary education. Now, the emphasis, like I was sharing earlier, in the early years is on foundational literacy and numeracy. Subsequently, there are one notch higher expectations that are there. And when the student comes to secondary, it is expected that the person has a flexibility of course choices in line with career aspirations. Further, this is my last slide on the school education part. There is a significant emphasis on teacher professional development. We all know that the teacher is central to education, and so aspects like teacher recruitment, continuous professional development, a better working environment, better pay and service conditions have all been recommended by the policy. There is also a reference to instilling the right human and constitutional values. Human values, honesty, truth, love. These are human values, and of course the constitutional values, right? Secularism, justice, equality, scientific temper. So emphasis on education providing these human and constitutional values. Next, there is also a big thrust on the digital infrastructure that needs to be created for knowledge sharing, so that children across the country, students across the country can get the right kind of access to the best education possible. So online teaching platforms and tools are being created. Examples of them are Swayam and Diksha and so on and so forth. The public school libraries, the government school libraries will be expanded, and also recognizing the fact that learning can happen only on a full stomach, right? A child who goes hungry cannot learn. And the midday meal comes at about 12:30 or 1 o'clock. And the early day in the morning, the child is in class but may not have nutrition. And we all know that very often for the child, the midday meal is the only meal of the day. So the child would have eaten 24 hours before. And to address this issue of nutrition and its correspondence to learning, a breakfast is being recommended in addition to the compulsory midday meal. So that's a little bit about school education. Let's move on. Let's talk about higher education. What is being recommended? The first one is a more general statement I'm making. Professor Jampala also referred to some of this. The curriculum will become multidisciplinary. There will be greater use of technology. The hope is that the gross enrollment ratio in higher education, which is currently at 26%, can be pulled up to 50% over the next 15 years. Academic credit banks, so people can acquire their certifications, diplomas, degrees, honors, whatever, and keep it in an academic credit bank, which can be pulled in for further education later. There is also a focus on internationalization of higher education. International in two ways. One, inviting good international universities to operate in India, making it more easy and liberal for them. At the same time, encouraging good Indian universities to develop their footprint in other countries. There will also be, there is a recommendation for consolidation of higher education institutions into three types: research universities, teaching universities, and autonomous degree granting colleges. Now, I have combined research universities and teaching universities into one category because the policy itself recommends that this be seen in a spectrum. There will be some research universities. I mean, if you take in the US, there are several universities which are known for their very high quality of research, right? I mean, it could be Princeton, it could be University of Chicago. But they also have teaching responsibilities. There are some which are more predominantly known for teaching. So universities will be in a spectrum, but some may be more towards the research side, and then they will be categorized as research universities. Some will be more dominant on the teaching side, and they will be teaching universities, and many will fall in between. And in every case, the proportion might vary, but universities will do a combination of research and teaching. There is also going to be the autonomous degree granting colleges. So, the current system of affiliating colleges will be dispensed with, and autonomous degree granting colleges, which are multidisciplinary in nature, will be the order of the day in the next 15, 20, 30 years. Which also means that single discipline colleges like pure engineering colleges, pure medical colleges, pure law colleges, etc., would now be expected to develop a multidisciplinary field, and they will be part of larger universities. I'll try and cover that as we go along. There is also a recommendation to set up the National Research Foundation. And this is on the lines of what the United States has, where research grants are given to fund outstanding research in universities and colleges. So the research grants come from this to universities and colleges, and there is a recommendation to set this up. Moving on, there is a big thrust on liberal education. What does liberal education mean? At one level, it is multidisciplinary exposure, right? So somebody who's studying sciences should also have good exposure to social sciences. Somebody who's studying sciences should get good exposure to humanities, because the world today is expecting people to have these multiple abilities, multiple perspectives, and we all know that the greatest breakthroughs are happening at the intersection of these kinds of disciplines, right? Biology and computer science is a classic example of where the biggest breakthroughs are happening today, right? So liberal education will therefore help people not be very narrow like they seem to be today, but actually multidisciplinary. There is also a thrust on a little more flexibility in curriculum. So therefore, in the Indian system today, if you choose PCM, physics, chemistry, mathematics, you really don't have the ability to choose anything else. You can't vary the courses within that. Now, just like the liberal universities overseas and here, the suggestion is to have course choice to students. Next is multiple entry and exit points, which means you get into a autonomous degree granting college. After 1 year, you can exit with a certificate. After 2 years, you can exit with a diploma. After 3 years, you can exit with a degree. And after 4 years, you can get a degree with research. Similarly, you may have acquired a certificate right now, but you want to join another university later in your career, you can join for the second year. So the policy, therefore, allows for multiple entry and exit. There is also enhanced student support. We have often underestimated the need for some of this. Academic support, which unfortunately to a large extent was happening only through coaching classes and so on and so forth. The policy recommends that we strengthen our own faculty in our own colleges so that the students get the required academic support. Financial support, greater number of scholarships, more generous scholarships, particularly for the disadvantaged, scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, girls, the people with special abilities, etc., etc. Also, there is a recognition of the fact that mental health is now a very important element, and the youth need a lot of that emotional support, counseling, and psychological support. So the policy has a very generous recommendation on student support. Moving on. There is a big section in the policy on greater autonomy and better governance. And how is this enabled? The policy recommends, in fact, complete academic, administrative, and financial autonomy to these colleges. And the colleges we defined earlier, multidisciplinary, large, with good administrative boards, which can exercise the right kind of oversight. Once that is established, there is considerable autonomy that is now going to be given. It also reflects in institutions being free to start and run the programs which they feel are appropriate. So they don't need approvals to the kind that seem to exist today, where they are affiliated to universities and approvals are such a big problem. There is another big recommendation on consolidating many of the current regulatory bodies, the University Grants Commission, the All India Council of Technical Education, etc., etc. There are several regulatory, the National Council for Teacher Education. There are several of these regulatory bodies which govern various professional and university education. All this to be consolidated under the Higher Education Commission of India, which will be the supreme regulator, and that will, of course, be organized in such a way that it doesn't cause more bureaucracy, but actually becomes a facilitator. There is also a recommendation on setting up the National Testing Agency. So as many of you know, in the US, for instance, the College Board, the Educational Testing Agency, run standardized tests, and that is largely used by universities there. So you will get an SAT score or you will get a GRE score, and that is used for admission to universities. Each college, each university does not conduct a test of their own. So the recommendation here is the National Testing Agency will do these tests for admission to universities. Moving on, there is a big recommendation also around integrating the professional education. What do we mean by professional education? Let's take engineering, right? A good engineer should obviously be educated in the discipline of engineering, but it's also a discipline where it is evident only in practice, right? So the exposure to the world of practicum has to be much higher if education has to serve its purpose. And lastly, the professional needs to have and understand the importance of public purpose. You know, many of us talk about Sir M. Visvesvaraya as an embodiment of the best engineer. His contributions to Pune, to the Nizam Bridge, and of course to several places in Karnataka are legendary, right? Now, if you see him and you see this professional, you can actually see this come to life. Work ethic, importance of public purpose, outstanding education in the discipline, and application in practice. This also goes on further to talk about a greater emphasis on vocational education. It is, in fact, in the classes 9 to 12, there will be curricular, co-curricular, academic, vocational, and many of these choices which students will have, and the hard compartments that exist today. You know, you can't really learn carpentry, or you can't really learn smithy, or you can't learn the cell phone mechanics. If you are in the academic stream today, you have to choose a completely different vocational education. You have to go to the ITI or whatever, right? Now, the new policy is recommending that there be a greater emphasis on options for vocational education, and therefore apprenticeships and internships. There is going to be a significant investment in faculty. All this can happen only if faculty are taken care, and therefore a tenure track system. So people are on probation for a period of time, and after that they get confirmed with full and permanent employment benefits, continuous professional development, and also empowered faculty, right? Which means that they have greater autonomy. Now, this in a nutshell is what the policy is all about. Now, let us move on to what is the future, right? The policy itself is anchored in a time frame of 15, 20, 30 years, like I said, right? Now, I will try and link this to the future of jobs, and some of the things have changed in this last 5.5 months. Firstly, this year, as you all know, has fundamentally altered the way we live, the way we work, and even the way we relate to one another. It is almost unimaginable that I would be doing a session like this for this group across the country and the world 5.5 months ago, right? The natural instinct would have been, let us do it at Vijayawada with the Vijayawada chapter, maybe in a hotel. But All this has changed now, right? So there have been fundamental alterations. There is also, as you know, some disciplines, some domains which have picked up real speed: big data, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and there is a apprehension that many of the unskilled kind of jobs may get taken over by machines. Therefore, the new workforce that has to come, and the education policy is going to build the future workforce, has to be more skilled. And like we spoke, they have to have an appreciation of multiple disciplines, and people who are multidisciplinary and creative are the ones who are likely to be in demand in the job market. We also believe that in the future, there will be a greater number of contingent workers. People will be employed for a purpose and released. People will not be anchored only in one organization. They might work in multiple organizations. They might not work full-time. They might do part-time and use the rest of the time for leisure or for education or something else. So the nature of work is going to change substantially. And therefore, the education policy actually recognizes all this. It is talking about not only developing outstanding employees for creating manpower for industry is one purpose of the policy, no doubt, but they are emphasizing that we will not only create outstanding employees, but outstanding citizens. We talked about human and constitutional values earlier. That is finding emphasis. Also, there is a big thrust on saying that it is not just about knowing stuff. It's not just what you have learned, but the ability to learn and continuously relearn for the next 25 years and beyond, or for your first job, third, second job, and all future jobs. So the ability to learn is what the NEP is significantly emphasizing. And that's what will be required, because there will be wave after wave of change that these employees will face. Therefore, for example, the curriculum load in schools is being reduced, allowing people to do a little more of the analysis and conceptual stuff. The testing, the assessments are being changed from rote memory-based testing to actual understanding-based testing. What are the key capabilities expected, therefore? In summary, if one puts it, the future world of jobs will require people who can think critically, who can communicate well, who can solve problems, who are creative, who will work well in teams, and have a degree of ethical reasoning and social responsibility. That is the capability set, and the new education policy recognizes this requirement very well. My last slide is therefore on what does all this mean to HR, right? If the policy is like this, if the future of jobs is going to be like this, the kind of workforce that is coming in is going to be like this, then what does it mean for HR? Let's assume that we have a good implementation of NEP, and we expect students who pass out in the next 20 years to come come from this new education policy systems, and they have come from the universities and from the colleges that have implemented NEP well. Then they are likely to be more learned, but more importantly, they would have learned how to learn and be more analytical. They would be more critical thinkers with interdisciplinary understanding. It is possible that we will get a higher entrepreneurial ability in the next batches of people who will come. Of course, we talked about language and math skills getting better. We talked about them having greater connection to industry because practice and vocational education are emphasized. They will be more engaged citizens, morally responsible, and they will be more adaptable to change. And therefore, we as HR people who are managing organizations, who are managing people, what do we need to think of? One is we may not be able to straitjacket people in jobs and see them for a lifetime in only those jobs. Okay, this guy has joined me in accounts. What I see in him is that he will be an accountant and probably over a period of 20, 30 years end up as the CFO. I mean, that could well happen, but it is very possible that a person who starts in accounts has the necessary skills to work in systems, maybe do something relating to data analytics, and do something else in his fourth job. So, straitjacketing of jobs may change. I think we will also find that people will expect more equitable treatment, and they will also want to work for organizations which are more socially responsible, because that's the kind of education that they are going to get. That's the kind of values that will get emphasized. It is also likely that employment terms will evolve substantially, right? A lot of our thinking is set on lifetime employment in one organization with one kind of a career. Things will change now, right? There is going to be flexi work. So therefore, our contracts of employment will change. People may expect differential rewards. Differential in the sense that postponed gratification, the provident fund, the gratuity, the superannuation, whether they will hold true when there is this gig economy is a question. So therefore, employment terms, newer contract terms is to be expected. It's also possible that because you will have better educated and more qualified people coming into the workforce, organizations will have to think of the quality of jobs that are going to be offered. If there is a strong mismatch between the qualification that people have and the education that they have and the nature of job that is offered, then this could lead to some kind of disharmony. Therefore, we will have to start thinking what kinds of jobs will we be able to offer to the different kinds of people who will come into the workforce. And lastly, because of this strong emphasis, as I said, on vocational education and apprenticeships, I think it will be good if all of us, particularly those in manufacturing and services, can create more such opportunities for students who will join us. Right. So let me stop here and hand it over back to Rajesh. I have taken 35 minutes to cover my initial presentation. Hopefully this provides a context for your questions. Over to you, Rajesh.
Thank you, Suresh, for a wonderful and simple way of putting the very complex new educational policy. In fact, actually, it is not new education policy, it is national education policy, which is new. New in the sense like it has many policy implications. As Professor T.V. Rao also joined our session, he is giving his messages. He was involved in 1986 policy formulation. The then P.V. Narasimha Rao, sir, is there as a HRD minister. And T.V. Rao has contributed a lot. And I would like to tell the audience that Professor T.V. Rao is an alumni of IIM Ahmedabad and is the founding member of NHIDN. Thank you, great sir, for joining our session. Yeah, now the audience participants can raise the questions in the chat box so that we will try to answer the questions through Suresh.
So as the questions come up, my special thanks to Professor Rao, the founder of the National HRD Network, founder president of the National HRD Network, for having made the time to join us. Thank you very much, sir.
So actually, I would like to ask a question to set the ball rolling. As you said, the education is the concurrent subject. Both central government and state governments have to do it. Suppose if how far do you believe that the state governments will be on the in tune with the central government to make this policy implemented in a better way? Do you see any challenge in this area? Because India, in sometimes, for the sake of politics, people are objecting the policies. When they are in opposition, they're talking in one way, and when they are in ruling, they are talking in another sense. But do you believe that everybody will come together to make this policy happening?
Right. Yeah. So I'll address this through a couple of what shall I say, real situations. Right. Education is a concurrent subject, and while the policy is set by the central government, the framing of rules and the implementation is with the respective state governments. We have often found that if the state governments and the central governments are represented by the same political party, then the implementation happens much smoother. That is to be expected, right? But that's in what we are also seeing today is, Odisha, for example, is not necessarily in the same political camp as the central government, but there is a thrust in Odisha to make this policy come alive. So I think it's a complex mix. People have to address their political audiences, so therefore there will be statements that will be made. But at the end of the day, they will see what is right for their states and do it. That's my firm belief. Let me take the financial angle to this.
Yes.
The new education policy is recommending that the education budget should be enhanced to 6% of GDP, and which is currently at about 3% of GDP, right? 2.8% or something like that. So this gap, if it has to be bridged, it is a substantial effort, and at least some of the recommendations of the policy require big budgetary approvals, big budgetary sanctions. So therefore, there is a dependency on the money backing the policy. Lastly, if I take the example of the three-language formula, which has come into some questioning because some states are saying this is imposition of Hindi. Quite frankly, the NEP is not imposing any specific language. It is saying that the NEP, the children in their early years are capable of learning multiple languages, particularly in that 6 months to 8 year, that age of a child. The ability to absorb languages is phenomenal. So therefore, it is better that the child gets exposed to multiple languages, and the state can choose whichever are the three languages that work for them. So there are sometimes, the popular media paints a picture which is not really what the policy has recommended. I would think the policy has got the absolute right recommendations. Rajesh, I think you're on mute.
Yes, sir. Professor TV Rao has commented that forget the politics and politicians, it is a bureaucracy and all other actors who need the support, and it will work for it. Thank you, sir, for your comment. I think there is a question, sir, whether if you encourage vocational education, does these people who are trained in vocational education will get jobs in India, in future India? That was a question by one of the participants.
Yeah. That's a complex question, Rajesh, and I wish I had the clairvoyance to answer that. It is, what has to be realized is, if you go back to the days of Gandhi and his belief in Nai Talim and his belief that education is of the head the hands and the heart, right? Now,
Yes.
a lot of our education today has become the head, right? It is very little of the hands and very little of the heart. This education policy is bringing back the primacy of working with our hands, learning the dignity of labor, and so on and so forth. Now, emphasis on vocational education, I covered it. Obviously, there will be more apprenticeships. The examination system will test for more application as opposed to rote learning. All this will happen. Will this all lead to jobs? Well, that is a very complex question, right? I mean, it is dependent on so many things. All that
Yes.
I can say is there will be a better prepared workforce, and the nature of those jobs, will continue to change. There will be new kinds of vocations, new kinds of skills that will become required, and the education system will produce those. Whether everybody will get a job, that's very hard to say.
Yes, sir. Actually, naturally, this particular session is we have more academicians, but no policy is talking about the pay structures of the staff members working in private sector. But if you take the Indian education sector, 50% of the contribution, especially in higher education, is mostly done by the private institutes. Why this policies? I mean, no policies actually giving emphasis on pay scales for those who are working in schools, in the colleges of private institutions.
Right. You see, we have to recognize that this is a policy and still not a plan, right? It makes, like I showed in one of my slides, it makes very strong recommendations on uh, teachers and faculty. Teachers in the context of school education, and faculty in the context of higher education, right? It talks about uh, giving them higher autonomy. It talks about giving them tenure tracks. It talks about giving them permanent employments after having passed through the probation period, right? So it as a policy, it lays down the right guidance. Now the implementation of it and the action plans will possibly take on from there, and let's see what comes out. I think it's as much a question of political will and the finances as much as it is an education matter.
Yes, sir. So there is a question like how far it is useful to increase in creativity of future kids, uh, creativity or lateral thinking in terms of how kids will be motivated to be more creative in this context.
Yeah, you see, one of the biggest issues with the current Indian education system is this is this overarching emphasis on memory, on rote-based learning, and very narrow definition of learning. Right. This has been further amplified by the coaching class system and our examination system. Now, if you look at how many of the advanced countries, particularly the educationally advanced ones, Sweden, Norway, many of the Scandinavian countries, you will find that the children get holistic education. Their abilities of designing, applying, thinking differently are much better because the nature of their education system is that. Now, later on, when we look at what they become as citizens, what they value, how they interact with others, what they create, it could be creation of a design to the creation of an enterprise.
Yes.
These kinds of things which are foundational are very important. And we believe that, creativity has to be emphasized, and that's from where the breakthroughs will come.
So there is a question, sir, like what is the minimum time it will take put this policy into practice? I think they have mentioned it will take another 15 years to fully implement this particular project, if I'm right. Otherwise, Sudesh sir will explain this.
Yeah. Yeah. See, we have to recognize that it will go at different speeds in various sections of the recommendations, as well as it will go at different speeds in various states. You have to see it in both dimensions, right? So, like I said, states like Orissa and Karnataka have already accelerated the implementation of the policy, and they want to get ahead of the curve quickly. Other states may take some more time. Also, some of the recommendations may be easier to implement. Some of the recommendations are more difficult to implement, right? Uh, so, for example, the National Testing Agency can get created, the National Research Foundation can get created. I think those will be faster, right? But there may be challenges in implementing something else. For example, if we talk about breakfast being introduced, now, does the government have the budgetary support for that? The Higher Education Commission of India, if that has to come into play, amalgamation of the existing regulatory bodies may take time. I mean, we don't know how things will unfold, right? The the frame in which the policy has been written is it's a 20-30 year frame. So therefore, depending on the acceleration that the respective governments want, uh, I think we will see the implementation unfold over the next 1-2 decades.
Actually, this policy is aimed at universalization and getting the much needed recognition to India as a Vishwaguru. That means which we want to reclaim back what we were once upon a time. As you're all aware, most of the participants I'm addressing, India is considered to be the knowledge capital of the world once upon a time. The first universities were started here, Nalanda, Takshashila. So more than 80 countries from different countries, 80 different countries, scholars used to come when there are no aeroplanes, when there is no internet, when there is no Zoom conferences. But today, our students are going abroad in large numbers. So, but this policy, whether it is potential to make India a global hub for education. So this is, I'm just clubbing 2, 3 questions here, sir.
Right. Let me try and answer, Rajesh. Uh, the policy makes several references to India's glorious past. One of them is the kinds of universities that we had, Nalanda, Takshashila, and many of them, right? Another reference is to the great scientists and mathematicians who came from India, right? It could be Aryabhatta, it could be Sushruta, it could be Charaka. There are references to their work. There is also a reference to the uh, poetic lineage. So, Banabhatta's work has been referred to in the policy. Now, they are doing all this to re emphasize the fact, like you rightly said, that India was a Vishwaguru in education. And in fact, they say that the combined work, the combined literary work in Greek and Latin put together is less than what is available in Sanskrit. These are not my words. This is what the policy says, right? So, therefore, there is a strong recognition of our rich and glorious heritage, which we unfortunately lost during the way. But this policy is trying to re emphasize and resurrect in some way that glorious past. And therefore, there is this internationalization of education, that element, which has been strongly emphasized. So they are saying that once you have developed significant expertise and reputation within the country, you should be able to go and set foot in other countries.
Sir, this is regarding once again the language policy. What about the languages preferred by the students when they are non-local of the present state they are living? How they handle this situation?
Yeah. I'm not sure if I fully understand this, but let me try and answer it based on what I understand. So let's say somebody has come to Karnataka, and uh, the person is from Gujarat. right? So they would not know Kannada. If the local state government makes it mandatory that Kannada has to be learnt, how do you handle? Perhaps that is the kind of intent of this question, right? Now, uh, I'm anchoring this in the NEP only, right? The new education policy is only saying this. It is saying that multilingual abilities are the gift of a child. Children are naturally gifted with multilingual abilities. It is our responsibility to give them exposure to multiple languages in the early years of their learning. For this, we recommend 3 languages, and the 3 languages can be chosen by the state. And the medium of instruction, preferably, should be the home language. Now, it is also it's only leaving it at saying preferably. It is not saying it is mandatory, right? So there is enough scope for options around this, so long as the basic principle of the child learning multiple languages and the medium of instruction being favorable to the child's learning. If these two are met, it is fine.
So this is regarding research, sir. Does this policy includes any importance for future research activities for new inventions?
Yeah. There is, a very strong emphasis on research that comes through in multiple ways, and I'll just reel out a few. Um, One is, of course, at the National Research Foundation, right, which will be the grant-making body for research grants, much like the National Science Foundation in the US. Second is the structure of education is been in that 5+3+3+4 that I described. If you do that last 4 years as a bachelor's degree with research, then from there you can directly go into PhD.
Yes.
So after your 5+3+3+4, after your 4-year bachelor's degree with research, you straight away qualify for your PhD. There is no MPhil in future. The MPhil is being withdrawn. Universities itself, like I described, are on a wide spectrum from teaching to research. Different may fall in different places, but there is an emphasis and recognition that a university's responsibility is as much in research as it is in teaching, and this anomaly of the past has to be corrected. So these are some of the elements where I can see the national education policy referring to research.
So this is a generic question like what qualities are required by teachers to teach in a classroom, maybe within the given context of NEP.
Right. Yeah. Well, there are many more qualified people on this call, I think, who can answer this question. I will respond on the basis of my understanding at the Azim Premji Foundation, where I work. Uh, you know, I sort of am simplifying it. There are 3 dimensions possibly on which a teacher needs to excel. One dimension is the subject competence, right? If you are a physics teacher, you should know physics well enough to be able to teach children. So there is a subject element of competence that is required. Then there is a second dimension, which is the dimension of actual classroom engagement, right? So the knowledge that you have needs to express itself in the classroom, and the ability to engage children, the ability to facilitate learning, the ability to follow through with questions, and subsequently, do the right kind of assessments, etc. So there is a whole dimension of how does that convert in the classroom. And then there is a third dimension, which is a teacher at the end of the day inspires and creates society, right? The future of India is getting created in its classrooms is a very common saying, right? Now, if one takes that, then really the teacher can instill the right constitutional and human values in students at whatever level. You check with the people on who are their biggest inspirations. The number one very often is the teacher or the mother. And therefore, there is this dimension of being an inspirational person in values. So, teacher qualities are subject competence, classroom skills, and values.
Yeah, yes, sir, I agree with you. Most of the school kids will say, "Who are your role model?" They say teacher. But if I ask my PG students, nobody wants to come to teaching. That is the biggest problem India is facing with respect to the quality of the faculty. Most of the youngsters are not interested in coming back to the faculty. But anyway, sir. Sir, I could not resist my temptation. I just want to know about the future will be more for an institutions like Ajim Premji Foundation, which is also actively engaged in teaching, I mean, learning ecosystem in India in terms of Ajim Premji Foundation as well as Ajim Premji's university. You're being the board member of the great institution we admire. You please throw a light on what kind of work really your institution is doing in the field of teaching and learning ecosystem in India.
Yeah, I could certainly answer that, but it won't be related to the NEP in any sense. But I'll take the next minute or two to explain the work that we do. It may just be useful for the general audience. Of course, we are in our early years. I mean, in the history of an institution, 15, 20 years is a very short time frame, right? So therefore, I think we should be modest in claiming success as yet. There is a long way to go. It's probably a promising start. Now, the Azim Premji Foundation is working in school education. Basically, our work is to work with school teachers across the country, particularly the government school teachers, and improve their capabilities in exactly the dimensions that I described. So if the teacher becomes better on those dimensions, then they become better teachers and you have better children, better students. So our work is with government schools, and it's at a reasonably big scale. About 1,500 people across the country are working with teachers. And we hope that over time, the quality of public education, we would have made a positive difference. So that's on the foundation side. Within the foundation, a subset of it is the Azim Premji University, which is a higher educational institution. Higher educational to the extent that we also have undergrad programs, but the bulk is in the postgrad programs at this point of time. Many of the things that we spoke of, like liberal education, right? We have tried to pioneer. Not pioneer, I mean, there are other universities also which are doing it. I would say we have tried to emphasize. So yes, a student who joins our undergrad program, for example, can combine a course in biology with a course in, let's say, literature, right? Which is unimaginable in many places, right? So these kinds of things which have been recommended in the national education policy are also being practiced in the way we have designed our curriculum. For example, we have a course called Understanding India, which is to build that social and citizenship consciousness in people. We have a minimum of 16 weeks of practicum in the postgraduate program, where they need to go and work in schools or in NGOs across the country. So there are several dimensions where what is being said in the national education policy has already been tried to be implemented within the foundation's work. So I hope that gives you a quick.
Yes, sir. Actually, I also strongly believe the future belongs to such institutions. Sir, there is a HR related question here. I think Harika is asking. Sir, what kind of training assessment is required to organize to cope up post-COVID situation by the HR department? May not be relating with NEP, but still, yes, we are living in COVID times. being HR manager. I mean,
Yeah. You see, it is um, difficult for us to predict what kinds of training assessments would be required, right? And you are using the phrase post-COVID. Uh, I would think we are still in the midst of COVID. Uh, you know, it's, like somebody who told me recently that we are probably going to be not in pre-COVID or post-COVID times, but we are going to be in COVID times for a long period, right?
yes,
So we just have to come to terms and find ways of living with COVID, right? That's my basic
yes,
submission. Now, in that light, there are many things that organizations need to do in terms of training. From the simple basics, which we all did, which is how to use online, how to work online, uh, how to, particularly in teaching, this becomes so much important, right? So
yes.
those are basic things that have to be done. Subsequently, what all would be required, because we talked about, the nature of human reactions changing, right? I mean, I would have loved to be with Rajesh and his team in Vijayawada today and engaging in a face-to-face, but I can't do that. But I still have to develop a relationship. How do I do that in online mediums? How do I do it with my teams? There are going to be multiple dimensions to this. I do not know the full answer to this. I'm also discovering, just like every one of us.
So we'll take a last but one question. Like education sector should be fully governed by government only. There should be no privatization of organizations of education. Why it is not possible in India when compared to other countries? That means whether India, the entire education system should be in the hands of the government. That is the question. Then why it is not possible?
Well, I will anchor this in the NEP. See, the NEP says that public education is the foundation, right? I mean, like in every great country, public education is the foundation of any good education, right?
Yes.
I'll try and pull out the exact lines so that you understand what I'm trying to say. Uh, yeah. Uh, okay. Anyway, while I pull that out, public education should be the foundation, but it does say that philanthropic minded, public purpose minded individuals and trusts and organizations should also have the opportunity to contribute to education. So, therefore, an extreme position that it should be only government is probably not practical. In fact, you should encourage not the commercially minded people, but there are many people who believe that public education is a public good. I should put my funds, philanthropic for a social purpose. And for such people who have such purposes, the environment should help them. So therefore, we, while we recognize that public education is key, government education is key, we should also have the opportunity for the right-minded individuals in private.
Well said, sir. Actually, India needs many different models. Not necessarily it should be exclusive domain of public or private. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sir, any parting thought? Because what will be your directional call for the future of education, future of India in that sense?
Uh, well, you know, only two things that I would like to say. One is, uh, this national education policy is a landmark policy. and really sets the tone for the next 15, 20, 30 years. And any policy is only as good as its implementation. And I really hope that the implementation happens well. So that's one dimension. The second dimension I want to emphasize is this also means that it is a time of change for HR people in the way we look at organizations, resources, and future recruits, right? So we will have to be proactive. We will have to be imaginative in the way we take full advantage of the changes that are going to happen in the workforce of the future. So both these dimensions, if we keep in mind, I think our session today would have been useful.
Thank you very much, sir, for your words of wisdom. At least we will have a bright future, and India will reclaim its legacy, I should say, and we will become the knowledge center for the world. And a lot of innovations and implementations will be done from India with strong emphasis on values and integrity and morals, ethics. So India will become Bharat in that sense. So now I request our secretary of Vijayawada chapter, Mr. Chelapati, who is also a CEO, youngest CEO of Endolife group of health companies. And he is a strong NHRDN. For the last 15 years, he is working for the development of NHRDN activities in and around Hyderabad and Vijayawada. Over to Chelapati for your vote of thanks.
Good evening, Mr. Sudesh, Dr. Rajesh, and all the senior colleagues from the HRD, and all the senior colleagues and academicians. And first time I think one of the sessions which I've been seeing for the last 2 decades been attended by 800 plus people, sir. So you actually made our day. Thank you so much, Mr. Sudesh, for such a great session. This is not a session for the HRD people or for the academicians. It's for everybody who basically wanted a change that needs to happen in the education system. I think today is a great day, and I think there are a lot of questions. Yesterday we were talking between Dr. Rajesh and me. This session is going to answer lots of questions. Question number one, that whether my kid needs to carry such large weighted bags. Okay, whether the kind of mugging education, the kind of talent problems that the HR man is facing today. I think lots of answers have come from this session, and we are quite thankful about what a clarity in which we actually briefed, sir. In fact, we all take this as a platform and try to probably keep coming back to you to be guided with regard to our National HRD chapter. And this is a vibrant session, sir, a great beginning for all of us. And on behalf of National HRD Network, Vijayawada chapter, and on behalf of the regional headquarters headed by you, and also the national headquarters, I thank each and everyone who attended this session, and look forward to meet all of you once again. And a very, very, very profound thanks to Mr. Sudesh for doing such a wonderful session, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Rajesh, probably you could give a kind of wrapping up words to all of us, and probably this is one of the good sessions everybody attended, I'm sure. We'll receive great appreciation from all quarters, sir. Thank you very much.
Set the tone, we will follow his. So we look forward to the better India and a stronger India and ethical India. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, and wish all of you have a nice evening. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.